All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on working with floats. As you know, floated elements move to the left or the right edge of the browser window or of their containing element if there is one. And I have an exercise that's very similar to the exercise that we just completed. It basically is using many of the same styles. I've just introduced a couple more images in here, and they of course are inheriting our float left that we already established for the images before. And then I also have a div that's wrapped around this text right here, and I call this div callout. So let's take a quick look at our XHTML. Here is the HTML. So here's my main image, which is this picture of the peppers together. And then I have the smaller images that are just following each other, 1, 2, 3. And then I have my paragraphs. And down here is where I have this callout div that I basically have wrapped around in H3, as well as some paragraph tags. And the rest of the page is pretty straightforward. It's just a series of paragraphs that we've worked with before. So if we look up here, you can see that our image has a float of left already applied to it. I still have my clear style in my style sheet, although I'm not using it. And then I've created one new style for callout, and all it's doing is turning the border on so that you can see where this callout element resides on my page. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to modify these. As you remember, with the float property, you can use the float property on block level or inline elements. Our images are basically inline elements, and you can see how the float works with those. The web browser basically treats a floated inline element just like a block level element, so you're not going to run into problems with padding and margin that you normally might encounter when you're dealing with inline elements. And then of course you can also float block level elements if you need to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and style this just to make it look a little bit different, and kind of view some interesting things that we can do with floats. So the first thing I want to do is come over here to my code view of my web page, and let's go ahead and let's style this call out a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead, in addition to turning the border on, I'm going to add a background color, and I'm going to make the color yellow. So I have the hex value already here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my font family, and this is going to be set to Georgia or a serif if the user doesn't have Georgia installed, and it looks like I've misspelled Georgia, which wouldn't really help us out too much there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, in addition, change the font style to italic. And let's also change the font weight to bold. And let's go ahead and let's just take a look at this real quick to see how it looks. So I'll save my page and we'll refresh in the browser, and you can see that now my text inside of here has changed, as well as become italic and bold. Let's go ahead and let's add a little bit of spacing. You can see that there's spacing on the top and the left, and that is because of the styles that we've already established that have been inserted onto our paragraph and H3 tags. So we have margins of top and bottom, and on the paragraph we have padding on top and left. We'll go into our call out and we'll add a little bit of padding on the right so that the text is not too tight on that right hand edge, and I'll try just using a padding of 0.5 ems. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a little bit of margin on the left just to push this item away from the left edge of whatever it will be encountering, and we'll use 0.35 ems here. And I'm going to save, and if we refresh, you can see that that gives me a little buffer right there, and also my content pushes away from the right hand edge. The final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give this callout box a width, so a specific width I'm going to assign to it. I'm going to go ahead and let's try a width value of 250 pixels. So it's going to make this element much thinner. Did I not save my page there? Oh, I spelled width wrong. That could be problematic. All right, let's just correct that and let's reload the page. And now you can see that the callout box now appears in this fixed width. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take this callout box and I'd like it to appear over here on the right. Well, I can easily achieve that by using a float right. So I'll go ahead and add my float and specify that I want it to float to the right. And now if I reload the page, you can see how my text is going to wrap around the left-hand side and the image now appears on the right-hand side. So that's perfect, that's what I want. This definitely creates a little more visual interest on the page. One thing that I don't like that's happening here is my 1em of spacing that I applied to my H3 looks a little bit too much in my callout box, so I'd like to reduce that down. And we can use that by using style sheets and being specific as to what H3 we want to target. Since this H3 is already located inside our callout box, I can go ahead and type callout space H3, so this will only affect H3s that are within a callout box. Sorry, I'm having some typing issues today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say callout space H3, and I'm going to go ahead and set the margin bottom, and let's try reducing it down. I'll try 0.2 ems. The default margin that we had established earlier, I believe, was a margin bottom of 1em. So this should override that, and that should bring that text up a little bit. Let's save and refresh in the browser, and you can see that nothing's happened. So did I spell everything right? Oh, my O in callout should have been capitalized. Case sensitivity does count. There you can see that just brings that up just a little bit. I also need a little bit of space down here on the bottom because it seems a little tight right there. And so let's go ahead and let's add a padding on the bottom as well as on the right. And let's just try using a padding on the bottom of 0.5 ems as well. And I'll save and let's refresh. And that looks much better. So now you can see that this is kind of a fun way to create call out information that appears, you know, within your text and gives it a little more emphasis. So I'm going to go ahead and emphasize the possible health benefits of eating peppers. The next item that I want to address is these pictures. And these pictures don't look too bad like this, but what I'd really like to happen is to have these 3 images appear to the right of the larger image right there. So we're going to create this by utilizing some of our CSS to be able to create this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap a div around those images. So I'm going to come in here to my code and we'll go ahead and we'll create a div right here. So I'm going to set a div and I'm going to set its class equal to, and I'm just going to call this class stack. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and close the div after these 3 pictures appear. So I'll come down here and I'll create a closing div like so. So of course if I save my page and we refresh the page, we shouldn't notice anything because divs are basically invisible until you assign some sort of CSS style to them. So now that I have that div there, now I can go ahead and I can start by styling it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a style for my .stack div. This is a class, so of course I indicate with a period. I'm going to go ahead and give this div a height of 300 pixels, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a width of 100 pixels, and I'm going to go ahead and float this div to the left. So if we come and refresh our page, you can see that this is what we get. So now our images are stacking nicely in a column next to our other picture right here, and that's exactly what I want. The next thing though is I want to create some space in between these images. So again, I will use CSS's property of specificity to be able to control the images that are only located within the stack div. So I'm going to go ahead and type .stack space image, And I'll open and close my curly braces like so. And I'm going to go ahead and tell the float to be set to none. And you can see that they aren't really floating inside our box because we've only set the width to be 100 pixels, so they're not allowed to float. But I'm going to go ahead and just turn the float off right there. I don't want them to float at all. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set their margin bottom to, and let's just use pixels. I'm going to use 15 pixels, and I'm going to go ahead and set their margin top to 10 pixels. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a little bit of padding from the top to the bottom, which will spread these out. So if we refresh our page now, we get a really nice spacing on these images. They could also use a little more spacing on the right, and that probably would make the most sense to apply it to our stack div. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come back to stack right here, and let's go ahead and set a margin right. And we'll use a margin right of, let's just try 0.5 ems and see how that looks. Perfect. Okay, and if you want more, of course, you can push it more. But you can see how using floats creatively and a couple divs, you can really improve your layout and make something much more interesting. So this is using many of the principles that we used in the last exercise, but now we're just incorporating them with some of the divs and being able to have more control. For those of you that are used to working with tables for layout, you can see how this is really slimming down on the amount of code that I've used, and I've just created a couple styles to be able to have this type of layout. So it's really nice to have this type of control.